Today's post is on what happened May 15th, 1916. The public burning of Jesse Washington. Okay. Let's see what they got to say here. Okay, we're going to do the Wikipedia. It says the lynching of Jesse Washington. I put the burning because that's what kind of lynching it was. Okay. All right. Okay, the lynching of Jesse Washington is a different way Black Americans got lynched instead of just getting snatched up and heading for the nearest tree. Sometimes they attempt due process, which in this case, they attempted it. I mean, his rights may have been violated, but that's not my point. That's for you to read and find out. My point is that you can still get lynched with due process and a trial. Okay? Now how? The will of the people. The will of the people. Sometimes the authorities just can't prevent a lynching. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to try to go over some of the due processes that they did for Mr. Washington here. Okay. Murder and arrest. In Robertson, Texas, Lucy Fryer was murdered while alone at her house on May 8, 1916. She was found clubbed to death, sprawled across the doorway of the formed seed shed. It was a grisly scene that included signs of sexual assault. Officials determined a blunt instrument was used as the murder weapon. She and her husband, George, were English immigrants and had become well respected in the rural community where they operated a farm. News of their death quickly reached the McLean County Sheriff, Samuel Fleming, who immediately investigated with a team of enforcement officers. So there was an investigation. Okay, the doctor determined that Fry had been killed by blunt force trauma to the head. The local men suspected that Jesse Washington, a 17-year-old black youth who had worked on Fryer's farm for 5 months, was responsible. One man said that he had seen Washington near the Fryer house a few minutes before Lucy's body was discovered. Okay, now they tried a little investigation. They got probable cause. Somebody seen them. Okay. It says, that night, the sheriff deputy traveled to Washington's home, finding him in front of the house wearing bloody stained overalls. He said the stain was from a nosebleed. Jesse, his brother William, and their parents was taken to a nearby Waco to be questioned by the county sheriff's department. Although Jesse's parents and brother were released after a short time, he was held for further investigation without an attorney or his parents present. His questionnaires in Waco reported that he denied complicity in Fryer's death, but offered contradictory details about his action. Rumors spread after Washington's arrest that the youth had been in an altercation with a white man a few days before the murder. Okay, now they got a motive. Okay. So, on May 9th, Sheriff Fleming took Washington to a neighborhood, Hill County, to prevent vigilante action. There's another sort of due process. They know the track record with lynching, so they didn't hold him in the jail. They took him off to the neighboring place so couldn't nobody get at him. So they're still trying to follow some due process. The Hill County Sheriff, Fred Long, questioned Washington with Fleming. Washington eventually told him that he had killed Fryer following an argument about the mules and described the murder weapon and its location. Long then brought Washington to Dallas, while Fleming returned to Robinson. Fleming soon reported that he found the bloody hammer where Washington had indicated. In Dallas, Washington dictated and signed a statement that described the rape and murder of Fryer. The confession was published the next day in the Waco newspapers. Newspapers sensationalized the murder, describing Fryer's attempts to resist Washington's attack. But the doctor who had examined the body concluded that she was killed before any assault. A lynch mob assembled in Waco that night. A lynch mob assembled in Waco that night to search the local jail, but had dispersed after failing to find Washington. So it was a good thing that they took him to the neighboring place, because there they was. They finna get him in the jailhouse. Okay. A local paper praised their effort that night. A small private funeral and burial was held for Lucy Fryer. Okay. Now, it says a grand jury was assembled on May 11th in McLennan County and quickly returned an indictment against Washington. The trial was scheduled for May 15th. The Times Herald of Waco published a notice on May 12th requesting that the residents let the justice system determine his fate. Sheriff Fleming traveled to Robinson on May 13th to ask the residents to remain calm. His address was received. Washington was assigned several inexperienced lawyers, but they gave him a lawyer. His lawyers prepared no defense and noted that he appeared placid in days before the trial. So they're trying to say placid means calm, so they was trying to say he was calm. So they did try a little something. You know, he's going to trial. You know, they got some witness, okay, so they're better than most blacks got back then. Okay. Now it says, on the morning of May 15th, Waco courthouse quickly filled to capacity in anticipation of the trial. The crowd almost prevented some jurors from entering. Observers also filled sidewalks and the courthouse. More than 2,000 spectators was present. Attendees were almost entirely white, but a few members of Waco's black community were present. As Washington was led into the courtroom, one audience member pointed a gun at him and was quickly overpowered. So they're still trying to protect him somewhat. You know, they got a gun. They didn't let him shoot him. They rushed him. Okay, as the trial commenced, Judge Richard Monroe attempted to keep order, insisting that the audience remain silent. Jury selection proceeded quickly. The defense did not challenge any sections of the prosecution. Judge Monroe asked Washington for a plea and explained the potential sentences. Washington muttered a response, possibly yes, interpreted by the court as a guilty plea. Okay. The prosecution described the charges, and the court heard testimony from law enforcement officers and the doctor who examined Fry's body. The doctor discussed how Fry died but did not mention rape. The prosecution rested, and Washington attorney asked him whether he had committed the offense. Washington replied, "That's what I done," and quietly apologized. The lead prosecutor addressed the courtroom and declared that the trial had been concluded fairly, prompting an ovation from the crowd. The jury was set to deliberate. Okay. After 4 minutes of deliberation, the jury foreman announced a guilty verdict and a sentence of death. Okay, a sentence of death. When you get sentenced to death, even back then, you do get a chance to appeal the death sentence. Okay, all right. The trial lasted about an hour. Court officers approached Washington to escort him away, but were pushed aside by a surge of spectators. Now, you know, when you go to court and you get convicted of something, you know, the deputies come get you. So they were still trying to save him somewhat. Okay, by a surge of spectators who seized Washington and dragged him outside. Washington initially fought back, biting one man, but was soon beaten. A chain was placed around his neck, and he was dragged towards City Hall by a growing mob. On the way downtown, he was stripped, stabbed, and repeatedly beaten with blunt objects. By the time he was taken to City Hall, a group had prepared wood for a bonfire next to a tree in front of the building. Washington, semi-conscious and covered in blood, was doused with oil, hanged from a tree by a train, and lowered to the ground. Members of the crowd cut off his fingers, toes, and genitalia. The fire was lit, and Washington was repeatedly raised and lowered into the flames until he burned to death. A German scholar, Manfred Berg, posits that the executioners attempted to keep him alive to increase his suffering. Now he says deposit, so that means to assume to be a fact. So he's assuming that's what they was doing. Well, he was there. Or, I mean, he did a lot of extensive research on it. So, I don't know. Okay. The fire was lit and Washington was repeatedly raised and lowered the flame till he burned to death. Okay. Now, Washington attempted to climb the chain but was unable to do so without fingers. The fire was extinguished after 2 hours, allowing the bystanders to collect souvenirs from the site of the lynching, including Washington bones and links of chain. One attendee kept part of Washington's genitalia. A group of children snapped the teeth out of Washington's head to sell as souvenirs. By the time the fire was extinguished, parts of Washington's arms and legs had been burned off. His torso and his head were charred, and his cranium was exposed. His body was removed from the tree and dragged behind a horse throughout the town. Washington's remains was transported to Robinson, where they were publicly displayed until a constable obtained the body late in the day and buried it. So that's what they did to him. Now, right here, now look at this. That's the will of the people. I mean, look at all them people. You really couldn't expect the police to do nothing there. You know, when the people get together, especially like that, that is a done deal. Okay, now that's the crowd. Now, this is when they had him on the chain, lifting him up and down. This is, that's when his parts and legs and everything fell off. This is him in the fire just burning. I assume that this is where they got his teeth and all that out his mouth. And this is how he ended up before they got him and dragged him behind a horse. Okay. Now, let's see, where was we here? Okay, now right here it says, the spectacle of the lynching drew a large crowd estimated at 10,000 to 15,000 at its peak. Now, back then, at that time, there was about 30,000 people living in Waco, so that's half the town. Okay, and it was including the mayor, John Dillons, and the chief of police, Guy Namara. Although the lynching was illegal in Texas, Sheriff Fleming told his deputies not to try and stop the lynching, and no one was arrested after the event. I mean, with all them people you just saw in the crowd, what are you going to tell them? Go stop them? So, you know, the authorities couldn't do nothing, and the mayor, since he know he couldn't do nothing, I guess he decided to capitalize off the situation. Okay, because it says, Green speculates that Fleming may have wanted to be seen as dealing harshly with crime to help his candidacy for re-election that year. Mayor John Dillons may have also encouraged the mob for political benefit. Okay, so it's always going. So that's when they got to capitalizing and mayors and making postcards and all that type of stuff. Okay. It says residents had telephone acquaintances to spread the word of the lynching, allowing spectators to gather more quickly and in greater numbers than before ever the telephone. Local media reported that shouts of delight were heard as Washington burned, although they noted some attendees disapproved. The Waco semi-weekly Tribune maintained that several black Waco residents attended. A claim historian Grace Howe of the University of Virginia considers dubious. Okay. Waco residents who likely had no connection with the rural Fryer family constituted most of the crowd. Some people from nearby rural communities traveled to the city before the trial to witness the events. As the lynching occurred, At midday, children from local schools walked downtown to observe, some climbing into trees for a better view. Many parents approved of their children's attendance, hoping that the lynching would reinforce a belief in white supremacy. Some Texans saw the participation in the lynching as a rite of practice for the young white men. So, that's what happened to him. Okay, now, as compared to my last post, George Meadows, where things haven't changed yet, but in the case of the lynching of Jesse Washington, yeah, they changed. They don't do us like that no more. You know what I'm saying? But it didn't come without a sacrifice. And what I mean by sacrifice, to give up something for a higher purpose, and which is always, when it comes to black, is our lives, like Medgar Evers, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and the list goes on. So, there you have it. If you want one of these shirts, t-shirts, email me at kurtbrown531@gmail.com. That's kurtbrown531@gmail.com. Thanks for joining my post.